Carry me Aki gold instead market, not a quart he would sell. Carry me Aki.
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, today I have what I hope will be a treat in store for you. I am going to be conversing with, it's not an interview, it's a conversation with Rachel Manley, whose father was the 3 times Prime Minister of Jamaica, and her son, Drum Drummond, whose father, George Drummond, was born at Windsor Castle, was a godson of King George VI, has a claim to being the 20th Earl of Oxford, and is from one of Scotland's most ancient and eminent families. And having been born at Windsor Castle, ended up in Wormwood Scrubs, convicted of a crime he did not commit, sentenced to a longer sentence than anybody else who was caught up in the mess actually received. And the judge made it absolutely clear he was giving him a longer sentence because he was George Drummond. The Drummonds, of course, used to own Drummond's Bank, but it was sold in, I think, 1924. And that made absolutely no difference to the judge as far as he was concerned, because George was a Drummond. He should have been a financial expert, which he clearly wasn't. He'd never worked as a banker. In fact, he hadn't really worked at all, although he has had a very interesting life, as this book, George the Last, shows. I mean, he was, for instance, one of the backers of Radio Caroline and was something of a maverick and a rebel. But what makes the Manley dynasty truly special is that it is Jamaica's premier political dynasty. Not only did Norman Manley and then his son Michael Manley head up the government, but also, as you will discover as we are speaking, several other prime ministers of Jamaica were related to them. The very first prime minister of Jamaica, Sir Alexander Bustamante, was a cousin of theirs. The next Prime Minister of Jamaica, Sir Donald Sangster, was a connection of theirs. Then Hugh Shearer, a subsequent Prime Minister, was also a connection of theirs. And what's really interesting about this really extended family is that they were on both sides of the political divide. And if you listen to the conversation, you will see that Rachel's son, Drum, makes the point that he actually picks and chooses what he regards as the successes of the various leaders of Jamaica, including his family. Now, his father was, actually still is, because he's still alive. His father is George Drummond, who was born at Windsor Castle, was a godson of King George VI, Drummond's Bank is a famous bank, and the Drummond family is a very grand aristocratic Scottish family, in part. And Drum is the heir in line after his father to the earldom of Oxford, which is it's connected to Shakespeare, so it goes way, way back. And I should mention that one or two names that will crop up that might mean nothing to you, at some point the name Binley Sangster comes up. Binley was a friend of Rachel's, my brother's, and mine. His natural father was Sir Donald Sangster, who became Prime Minister of Jamaica after Sir Alexander Bustamante. And so that's to put it in its context. Another name that crops up that really requires some explanation is actually the Bitter family, because I first of all mentioned Estella Bitter, she was married into the Bitter family. She was very beautiful when she was young, and there's a photograph of her in the book, because this is all about the book that they have written, because Rachel and Drum have written a biography of his father, who was Rachel's first husband, and Stella features in the book. And there is a hysterical scene in the book, which we allude to in conversation, where after George is convicted, and first of all, he's convicted for a crime he didn't commit. Then he's given a far longer sentence than anybody else because he was a Drummond. And the judge took the view that being a Drummond, he should have known certain things about the financial world, notwithstanding the fact that he never, ever worked in the financial world, still hasn't. And so there are elements of punitive class prejudice that emerge in the book. But there is a hysterical scene in when Rachel and Stella go to visit George in Wormwood Scrubs. And Stella, who is used to being treated in the most spectacular fashion, because she was married into the Bitter family, which is one of Jamaica's old grand families. And she, in her own right, was a descendant of the Duke of Alba. And she objected to the way they were disrespecting her and Rachel. And she informs them that they've got to shape up because she and Rachel are Caribbean royalty. I mean, I could just see Stella doing it. It was hysterical to me, but this comes up in the conversation. And of course, Michael Manley's legacy, which has been very mixed, because he was very much an idealist, but his grasp of economics was very much from the London School of Economics, and his legacy was, in social terms, actually often very positive in certain respects, but in economic terms, sorry, the London School of Economics proves without the shadow of a doubt that socialism, while it was a noble concept created in the 19th century in answer to the terrible inequities that were resulting from the shift from an agrarian economy into an industrialist economy. And it caused huge social and economic problems for many, many people, certainly for the masses. And he was a proponent of democratic socialism, which it emerges as a result of the many experiments in the 20th century with socialism. It actually doesn't work. But that's not to say that he did not contribute positively to Jamaican, because he did in some ways, which emerges in the conversation. What also emerges in the conversation was how difficult it was for poor Rachel, because all her friends and the world that she was born into and brought up in was, I mean, let's put it this way, her friends weren't eager to see her father's policies succeed. And the way she has dealt with her life and with the actually cocktail that she has been presented with is fascinating and very much to her credit. She's a lovely, lovely person. And her son, Drum, you will see, is also lovely. And he, of course, is a wonderful combination of the British aristocracy and really the Jamaican and the Bayesian elite. But in a very down-to-earth way and in a very conscionable way. And I mean, most Jamaicans that I know, it has to be said, irrespective of their class or colour, have always cared for the welfare of the people. But how it is implemented has been a huge source of conflict in Jamaica throughout much of my lifetime and Rachel's lifetime. And this is a fascinating book. It's a unique tale because Rachel marries this British aristocrat, born in England, obviously born at Windsor Castle, but British, not English. The Drummonds are Scots. And you know, at the time that her father is then going to become Prime Minister of Socialist Jamaica. You couldn't make any of this up. But it's a glimpse into really history, because Rachel embodies a large part of West Indian history. And also, what is interesting about her as an individual is how wonderfully down to earth, but down to earth in a very sort of a wonderfully inclusive, and she's always been very generous spirited and always bright and always good-hearted. And I think that comes across, and it certainly comes across in the book as well. And what comes across in the book as well, as I hope in our conversation, is how impossible it is to pigeonhole people. And because Rachel has straddled the divide in so many ways, and I think she should write her own autobiography. biography, because she has so many insights and she's led such an interesting and varied life. And now I'm going to turn you over, because this is basically a conversation. It's not an interview. And hopefully you will find it interesting, and you will find it sufficiently interesting to buy the book. It's on sale at Amazon. Okay, thank you so much. Enjoy. Greetings, Rachel and Drum. Thank you so much for allowing me to interview you. I think I've read your wonderful book, George the Last, which is a great title, by the way. And I mean, your story is just amazing. It's so amazing that I think I should let you do all the talking. So what are we going to start with? Okay. Rachel Manley is the daughter of Michael Manley, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica. And she is a writer in her own right, and her son, Drum, is a lawyer in Jamaica. And they have written this book about his father and her first husband, who was he is an extraordinary character. And it's an amazing story. So can I just throw the ball in your court? Which one of you is going to speak first?
Drum.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. The subject matter, which is my father, I think just to start off, my mother and I are West Indians, essentially. I'm fully West Indian. So my English father intrigues me, but a lot of what intrigues me, and hopefully the reader, but I think intrigued my mother as well, was that my father came from a long legacy of, I guess it would be aristocratic or semi-aristocratic pedigree and family in England. And he was very English, but yet he was very much a rebel and very much a living in Barbados half the year kind of fella, barefoot with a convertible Benz or convertible something. And he kind of was, there was a piece of him that I think was a rebel against the status quo in England and the government in terms of the BBC and Radio Carolina, what music was allowed to be played, and wherever he thought there was injustice or racism or elitism, he was a natural rebel towards that. And you've mentioned my mom's father, Michael Manley, who was also a bit of a rebel, and on a regional and international scale, he kind of, was an advocate for the downtrodden and the poor and the black masses of the Caribbean. So I think that there was a bit of a parallel between the two men, and I'm sure that was a part of what maybe intrigued or attracted my mother originally to my father. And if you read the book, you will see that it started very hot and at a fast pace, and the quote unquote marriage ended in an equally quick and fast termination and truncation. So,
yes, but the fact of the matter is your parents' marriage really didn't stand a chance, because
correct.
Your father was charged, I think, very unfairly with a crime that he actually didn't commit. And what comes across loud and clear in the book is to what extent class prejudice worked against him to make sure that not only was he put in prison, but that he was put in prison longer than anybody else, even though he was completely innocent. And, you touch upon elitism, but the reality is, both in Britain and in the West Indies, You have the old elite, you have the new elite, and you have the upcoming elite, each of which is quite determined to hang on to its. Well, the old elite tries to hang on. The new elite is busy kicking the old elite and trying to kick away the upcoming elite. And the upcoming elite is quite determined to bugger both the elites that is the old. And no, it's true. I mean, I've seen it in here time and again in Britain. If you are an aristocrat or nowadays a celebrity, you are given a far harsher ride legally. And the message that the judiciary gives to the old elite in this country is your day has passed. We are the new elite, and we're going to hit you. And they did it to your father, I thought, extremely unfairly. Don't you think that's a fair, reasonable assessment, Rachel?
I do. I really do. George is by no means an angel, but it's ironic that I think this is one time where he really was trying to help the underdog. I mean, he always liked to try to help, but in trying to help the underdog, he got penalized for something that I think he was totally unaware. You know, unsigned travelers checks. Who knew? And I think the judge's words were, you know, if you didn't, you should have known better. In other words, it's no excuse not to know. And I suspect it was like teaching the elite a lesson. Yes, I'm certain of it.
I think the judge made the point that because he was a Drummond and Drummond's bank and he was officially a banker, even, of course, the judge must have known that you can't be a banker by inheritance. And therefore George would not have known because it had been sold in, I think, 1924 or some such thing.
Yeah.
This was like 50 years later.
Yeah.
And the judge would have known all of that. You know, but I mean, you must have been devastated at the time because you were newly married and pregnant.
I mean, I was. And to be honest, he never really told me what it was. And I was under the impression, I'm not quite certain if he told me, if I just assumed it was traffic charges, like traffic tickets, because he used to have lots of traffic tickets in his Lamborghini pocket. And I just had this call. I wasn't in England because I was having terrible morning sickness in Barbados. And the lawyer, John Clitheroe, called me and said, you better come on the first flight because sentencing is, I think it was Tuesday. So I arrived, and when I heard the verdict, summing up on the verdict, I fainted in court. Well, I used to faint a lot with the pregnancy, but I just fainted. I couldn't process it. But you know, it's funny, Georgie, when I was young, I realized I always had a sense of unreality, almost as though I was unreal, and life was just this odd adventure that I never, even in the bad times, never felt sorry for myself, nor did I ever feel pleased with myself. I was just sort of unreal in it all, and it came and it went. And what did I have? This precious son here who has been my reality since.
But you know, Rachel, we were brought up in a very elitist, unworldly world.
Yes.
When I was reading the book, I mean, I thought, my God, so much of what you said and did was what I said and did, including getting married very quickly. I mean, we were brought up in a world with, in some ways, we were untouched by bad things. And in other ways, there were bad things all around you. And you sort of, I suppose you just blocked them out. I don't quite, we were brought up in an extraordinary way, looking back on it.
Yes, it was a rarefied air. But you know, you wrote something in a email, in a WhatsApp to me that touched me very much because it was so true of my life, that we were surrounded by these people who sustained our world, you know, nannies and cooks and gardeners, and they were the most real things in our lives. They were what was completely next to us, nurturing us, and they were just the most beautiful people. And I think when you said that, I thought it's true. That was the richest part of our upbringing, not because they served, because they nurtured.
Well, my brother Mickey, who, as you know, was sweet on you. Mickey used to say, because Mickey was positively prejudiced in favor of black people. And I used to say to him, "You're such a racist." Which
Oh dear.
he used to say, well, it's because the servants loved us far more than anybody else did. But it's true. We were very lucky because, I mean, but I don't knock my parents or their generation, because they had their own issues to deal
Yeah.
with. And you know, but if it hadn't been for the servants, really, I don't think any of us would have been grounded or really nice people. But the result is that no matter how dysfunctional most West Indians of our background were, we were actually basically quite nice people. And I'm sure that's entirely due to the servants.
To a large extent, but I would say in my case, um, very much all the better things in me come from my grandparents, and they're very principled and imaginative uh, embrace of Jamaica. It was a very unusual upbringing, and has left me with a part of myself that is much bigger than myself. That I don't really own. It belongs to them, but it's still in me. You know, if I go to do something wrong, the other day, I was going to do something really sneaky and wrong, and I just felt my grandfather in the room looking at me, and I think I told Drum I just didn't do it. He's still there.
But your grandfather and grandmother were wonderful people, and they were very honorable.
Yes. Yeah.
And your grandfather, with no disrespect to your father, I thought was actually a far greater man than your father. I thought he was a more humane person in many ways, and more realistic. I mean, he didn't have the benefit of real power the way your father did. But I thought he would have made a far more successful, not trying to be rude, but because your father's heritage was, and I get that your father was a product of his time. And I mean, by the way, was your father Fabian?
My grandfather was a Fabian socialist, which a lot of people don't realize, because he expelled the communist wing of the party. But a lot of people don't realize that Fabian socialism is totally different to communism. I think it's a misunderstanding in the world today. You see all over the place. You know, the Fabian socialism was a much sort of mild, idealistic movement. But my father, I would say, was a Lasky socialist, from his influence from Harold Lasky at London School. I think that was his influence.
But of course, the LSE was set up by the Fabians to advance
Yes.
socialism.
Yes, absolutely.
Your, I mean, your heritage is wonderfully interesting. Drum,
Yeah.
how have you reconciled your British and your Jamaican heritage?
Well, the truth is that I've always lived in the Caribbean between Jamaica and Barbados, and I'm a waterman and a surfer. I've always been grounded by things natural, and the groundedness of West Indians, especially of humble beginnings. So I've always resonated with the West Indians of all types of West Indians from both Jamaica and Barbados and Trinidad. And I've seen my father and the English side of things, and my English family and my English heritage and my English friends with a bit of intrigue and curiosity, but a lot of otherness, meaning it's almost like I'm looking at a tourist or another world. I don't fully understand it, or I'm not fully engaged in it, but it intrigues me, and I've been around it when I think about it all of my life. But that's not really who I am, but yet it is a part of who I am. So it's a bit of a dichotomy maybe. And but
It's
but in
interesting.
terms of my personality and my behavioral traits, and so I'm 99% West Indian.
It's interesting though, because I suspect because you've never really lived in England,
Yes.
you don't see the tremendous similarities, because there
Well,
are
it could be.
beneath the superficial differences. Okay, England's basically more structured and colder and very
Yeah.
literally colder. But when you strip all of that away, the West Indian elite, for want of a better word, is very, very similar in its outlook and also in its values as the West Indian, which I suppose is not that accidental, because basically we as West Indians are British, although British by tradition, if not
Right.
always by heritage. But because, of course, I've spent now most of my life in Britain, so I can see the similarities
Right.
that in a way that I wouldn't have been able to see when I first came here. I noticed the differences, and the differences are profound, but they're a lot more superficial than people realize. And also, of course, the world has changed since your mother and I were young in the most dramatic way. I mean, partly your grandfather helped to change it, in some
Yes.
ways for the good, because I mean, one of the things your grandfather did, which was very desirable, was, and Tony Blair did the same thing in England, which was they altered the perception of people. They didn't so much alter the reality, but they altered the perception of people who felt they were outside of the banqueting hall, that it was now
Right.
okay for them to join the banquet. And and I think your grandfather's rhetoric and Tony Blair's rhetoric, to a large extent, was a big scene shifter in allowing people to think the old order has passed and we are now allowed into the banqueting hall, which I think was a very positive thing. Because, I mean, Drum, you of course wouldn't know because you weren't even born, but when your mother and I were children, both Jamaica and Britain were extremely elitist.
Right.
And I mean, in Jamaica, it wasn't so much about color, as everybody used to say, it was about class. And in Britain, it was about both color and class. But I mean, it's everybody in those days, it was so much more restrictive than it subsequently became, partly because of your grandfather and Tony Blair. What do you think, Rachel? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I do. I think he let the genie out of the bottle, and you can't stuff that genie ever back in, and it is a sort of pride of spirit, whereas before, I believe history, and I mean, you know, obviously the colonial history and the poverty had reflected on the whole, you know, underclass masses of Jamaica in a way that negatively impacted on their sense of identity. And I believe that, I don't know one can heal that. I think that underneath is the reality that we are all equal human beings, and that reality just was let loose by, as you say, the rhetoric and the feeling at the time. And though there were many terrible economic problems during the time, I think we are left with, in a way, a much more healed and healthy society, a less neurotic society. I mean, Jamaica will always be a kind of, it's vibrant, it's vivid. There is nothing about Jamaica that's, I don't know if it's a reaction against the English stoicism, but Jamaicans are just a sort of burst of color and light and creativity.
I've always said that Jamaicans are positive, whether they're positively positive, positively neutral, or positively negative, they're definitely positive.
Yes, if it is even that they hate something, they positively hate it. That is very true. They're wholehearted.
I think that's more to do with the fact that Jamaica was the jewel in the British crown. Because, of course, people now think India was, but India wasn't even a colony when Jamaica ceased being the power that it had been. Because
Grenada thinks it is a jewel in the English crown. Do you know that? I discovered that the other day. Grenada thinks it is the jewel in the British crown. Yeah. So maybe we're all claiming it, or it's part of our.
They're welcome to think it, but the fact that Lord North said when the Americans gained their independence, and George III was really very upset about it. Lord North said, "It doesn't matter, Your Majesty, we have Jamaica." Because
I love that. I love that.
Something, I forget what it was, something like 26% to the national GDP, Jamaica on its own. And I think that Jamaica's feistiness comes actually from the fact that it was so special, so important. Also, because it was so special and so important, it had the creme de la creme, and some of it was natural selection, because the whites who survived, and they often didn't, if you've read Lady Nugent's diaries, you know, they dropped like flies, because they yellow fever, malaria, etc., etc. So the ones who survived were superior genetic stock, just by having survived. Then you had the blacks who were imported, and Jamaica had the choice of all of the slaves. The slave boats would first initially go to Jamaica. For instance, the Zong, which was the boat that caused the abolition of the slave trade with Lord Mansfield, was headed to Black River. And so Jamaica had the cream of the crop of the slaves as well. And then everybody else got, thereafter, they got the leavings, so to speak. So Jamaica, I think, genetically ended up with the creme de la creme. I think that's a part of it. And so it wasn't only cultural, and it wasn't only economic. I think it was actually genetic as well. And I could be wrong, but that's my take on it. But I think there are parallels between Jamaica and Britain as well, because Britain was for a century the world's leading empire. And so you have these two societies that had greatness at some time. And I think that's a part of a culture that takes a long time to forget. Your relationship with George, to me, reading it, is a love story that ceased being a sex story. I mean, the sexual part of it obviously died very early, because you moved on to other people, but he remained a constant in your life. And Drum, I mean, what did you think of this extraordinary Englishman as a father? You must have at times thought, oh, this is wonderful, and at other times thought, oh, well, what did you think?
I think I think the first 5 years truly I was essentially raised by mom. And then when I was young, mom can tell you, maybe two or three, my stepfather, Paul, came into my life, and he was really my first father on a continuous basis, on a daily basis. My father, of course, I knew, but I would see him when he would visit. And then when we moved to Barbados, I think it was 1976. And that's a whole complicated discussion as to why we left, and the relationship between my mother and my grandfather and the country then. But when we went to Barbados, then my father became more of a constant. And again, he was never dull, always flying in a fancy car, and he'd have his rum and coke and his peanuts. And he's not a guy to sit around to have Sunday dinner, for 3 4 hours. He will come for an hour and he'll entertain, and he may have a gift if he's been somewhere, or he may decide he's going to treat us to KFC. He seemed to be, on the face of it, quite wealthy, or he seemed that way when I was young. And he would be a kind of this English slash Bajan, not caricature, but character, who would just fly in and out your house for a brief period of time, and then he was off. So it was colorful, not boring. He was a hard fellow to pin down in terms of understanding him, knowing what his motivations were, what his habits were. He was very fleeting and spy-like, hard to know.
Do you think that's still an accurate description of him?
He's not changed one bit, whether he's rich, middle class, or poor, and he's been all three at different times, repeatedly. He doesn't change one bit.
That's so true. That is so true.
But it's an extraordinary story. Born in Windsor Castle and ending up in Wormwood Scrubs. Oh, by the way, I must say, Rachel, I killed myself with laughter when I read about you and Stella Bitter and Stella with people. I loved it.
My goodness. Estella, she really was wonderful to me. I have no idea why, but she just took me under her wing. From I was little, she used to just spoil me outrageously.
Well, she was very warm-hearted.
Very warm-hearted, and she loved you.
Yes.
She used to talk about you all the time.
Well, Mummy and Stella were friends when we were children.
Yes.
And they remained friends all their lives.
Yes.
In fact, the last time Mummy came up here, she and Stella went to lunch and bloody blah. And I went to see Stella quite a bit. In fact, I went to her anniversary party with Len at the Duke of York's barracks. But I think a part of the connection is also through Carol.
Yes.
For people who don't know, Carol Brennan, now Carol Melville, because her mother was a bitter.
Her mother was a bitter. No, her mother was a bitter, and was Keith's
sister. Keith's
sister, right?
Yeah. So I think but Stella was very warm-hearted.
Very. And an enormous heart, and she was irrepressible. She wasn't. Even when she was really old, I remember going there, and she was very annoyed because she said Leonard got into bed and wouldn't get up. Not meaning that day in life, he had gone to bed and wouldn't get up. So she was very annoyed with him, and she took us all to this wonderful restaurant, me and my present husband, and she literally gave Len hell for the entire dinner. But Len was safely at home in bed, so he couldn't hear. She so funny.
No,
Really.
but
Do
I
you
remember
know?
you. Oh, sorry, go on. What were you going to
Do
say?
you know that Danny and I wrote a book together about his heritage, Carol's husband.
I've tried to buy it.
I'm going to send you a copy. I'm going to post you a copy.
Please, please.
Here, I'm getting a little free ad in.
Love.
Yeah, the airport shop in Jamaica is desperately trying to get copies to sell as well, actually.
So hard to get. I have 3 copies here, Georgia, and I will send you one. I think you'd find it fascinating because it's another story of an old Jamaican family, but then all the Bostage roots.
Well,
Yeah.
Danny and his brothers and we all grew up together, as you know.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
his father, John, and my father
Yeah.
at St. George's together.
That's right.
They had, but I mean,
Yeah.
the Melvilles are a fascinating family because, of course, his grandfather or his grandmother's father was the Bostage staples.
The Bostage staple, and the amount that in writing that book, the amount of things that Danny didn't know. He was an extraordinary man. He invented the roller blind. He invented the belt for the machine gun for the Second World War. He invented the modern bookbinding we use today for books. I mean, he was an incredible inventor, and we went and saw his house in Somerville because I teach in Boston, and when we were coming back in the car, he looked at me and he said, "Why did we grow up in Jamaica? My grandfather was one part of the great grandfather was part of the golden age of invention." And I said, "Danny, that's why people write memoirs." Well, by the following morning, Carol said to me, "Rachel, I'm sorry for you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "You put that idea in Danny's head and you're going to get stuck with it." So me and Danny did this book together. So
I read it because I'm sure it's fascinating.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
So, are you working on anything else?
I have, I'm working on a collection called Stories I Forgot to Tell, a lot of which are stories that didn't fit into any of the trilogy or any of the books, because it's 11 books now I've written. They never fitted in, but they are extraordinary stories. Most of them, they happened to me, but only because of my strain, that I've landed with these very interesting people in my life. They're not really my stories, but they become my stories because I had a kind of access that I shouldn't normally have had because of them. And things like spending an hour and a half with Fidel in the back of his plane. It's a story. It's a story, and there are all of these little bits that didn't go in the books that I'm putting together.
But this is what makes your life fascinating.
Yeah, yes, even to myself.
No, I know exactly what you mean, actually.
Yeah,
But I mean, it happens around one, but
yes,
that's one's destiny. And I mean, because anyway you cut it, you are a member of Jamaica's leading political dynasty.
yeah, I guess, yeah.
So grandfather,
Yeah.
and
A past dynasty, perhaps.
there is no present.
Well said.
They are no, it's true, John. But the Manley dynasty is the leading political dynasty in Jamaica.
Yes, when you think that Buster was part of it,
But wasn't Shara also?
Yes,
Yes.
and Shara, and we discovered the other day Sangster is related to us.
No.
That's incredible, yeah. And Vera always said so, and then somebody, I think it was Ainsley Henrique, somebody got the pieces together to show how. That's 5 prime ministers in a family. Well, 4 and a premier. A lot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you seen Binley recently, Binley Sangster?
You know, Drum sees him. I think Drum is more into. I haven't seen him for a while. Have you seen him, Drum?
I see him now and again. I speak to him, usually not in the last 2 years, but usually I speak to him a couple of times a year. Yeah, and
He's
he's
still
all,
married
he
to
did
the
the
Mahon
live
girl?
right.
Is he still
Sorry,
married to the Mahon girl?
I don't know.
Melanie Mahon, who was my little girl best friend. I have to state that because I don't want Carolyn herself to start scrapping over me. But she married Johnny Martinez, and then he died. Who was married to Binley? I know Binley's wife. Why am I forgetting?
Wasn't it one of the Mahon girls who married him?
No, no, no. I
Somebody
can't.
like that. Anyway,
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
but Drum, what do you think of Jamaica as it is now?
Oh Lord, that's complicated. Well, look, I think the world is becoming a hard place again. Jamaica, I think, maybe has always been a hard place. Jamaica remains a very hard place for the underclass. But there are many leaving the underclass, maybe heading into what we might call the lower middle class. It's a hard place for the middle class, and I suspect, as it has always been, it is a very amazing, beautiful, fun, wonderful place to live if you are part of the rich, and you can afford to appreciate and to participate in the mountains and the sea and the people and the culture and the sports and the music. It's an amazing place. But if you're in a grind all day long, you know, as part of the truly working class, laborers or the underclass, it's a hard place. And many of them have no time and no resources to even go to the beach on a weekend, because they're dealing with their family homes, having worked all week. And so, though Jamaica is part of the Caribbean, I think the smaller islands maybe I'm sure they don't appreciate it, but I think maybe they have a little more free time, and they're closer to the beach, and they can go to the beach and lower their blood pressure and have a beer on the beach and swim and enjoy maybe what those tourists pay all that money to come and enjoy. Whereas I think that's harder for regular Jamaicans who are struggling, So Jamaica has always been a tale of two Jamaicas, those that have and those that do not. I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
yeah, and I think on both sides of the political spectrum, I think both JLP and PNP, they have tried their best. I don't agree with some of my own family's policies, and I don't agree with everything on the other side as well. But I think they've all tried in their own way, whether disagreeing or not, to lift Jamaica as a people. And I think, notwithstanding the bumps in the road that we've encountered, I think things are improving, but they're still hard.
But what you say is absolutely true, because I've often said to people, especially in the first world, when people come up with their moralizing that, oh, we condemn somebody because he allowed his child to do such and such a thing. I say, keep your first world morality to yourself. When your grandmother is going to be starving if you don't do something that we may regard as undesirable, but they regard as necessary for survival. I said, you can't have first world morality in an impoverished society.
That is so true. That is so
Well
true.
said.
And the Black diaspora, Black America, and the Caribbean. The truth is that we are a fatherless society, more than half of us. And then you have added economic pressure, and you have, so women are growing up without husbands or significant other, male significant others, to help raise his children. And then the mothers who may have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 children have to travel to North America or England to work and send money back, maybe to the grandmother or the, grandmother or grandaunt, to raise these children. And I've seen that firsthand. You kind of think about it abstracting, it doesn't sound good, but when you see it firsthand, and you have these little boys and little girls growing up with no father and not even a mother, because the mother that they know, because they may not know their father, the mother that they know has also traveled away. And this is happening in thousands. And, it leaves, yes, it has remittance money flowing back into Jamaica, which, by the way, is one of our biggest industries now, our biggest sectors of the economy. But the social impact, I think, is immeasurable.
Well, that's always been a huge problem in Jamaica.
Yeah.
I will throw out one idea, which is that I've noticed this, because if, for instance, you go to Russia, where there was great poverty, and the Russian serfs weren't freed until 1861, if I remember correctly. And then once they were freed, they're the same thing as in Jamaica. Once the master ceased to have responsibility, it almost removed the safety net of obligation and caused a whole different layer of problems. But I remember it must have been about 93 or 94, seeing the widows of veterans from the Second World War selling used underwear. Can you imagine selling underwear to be able to survive? And I thought, wow, I'm always going on and on about Jamaica and how harsh life was for the poor.
Yes.
I'm not saying it wasn't. My father always used to say, I don't know how they survive. And that, I think, was a refrain throughout people of our backgrounds, that we read. It was a mystery how they survived. But then when you add the layer of the climate, you realize that Jamaicans were really very lucky in some ways.
Yes.
We didn't have adverse winters and adverse climate the way they did in Europe, and I think that I'm very encouraged in some ways. I don't know if you are, and Rachel, I want to hear what you think. I'm very encouraged by the fact that our lifetime, Rachel, we have seen a massive improvement in the standard of living of ordinary people in a way that when we were children would have been unthinkable. And
absolutely, it's interesting. That absolutely. There was a standpipe in a village, or even, a block of ice somewhere. People kind of have the necessities to various degrees. But what I find interesting is that there's something about our history, the toughness of it. When I look at all the changes taking place in the world today, and I think we're probably going in for fairly rough times for a lot of complicated reasons that are all intersecting. And I think of the way every year Cuba, Jamaica, we've been able to withstand hurricanes that are baffling North America, battering them, and they have FEMA. The other day, Puerto Rico had a terrible hurricane, and it was so strange. I was thinking, if they weren't waiting for FEMA that was coming too late, they would have got on with it and probably saved a lot of lives, because they'd had to have done it every year in hurricane season. And I think there's a toughness we've developed. And something else, with the whole internet and truth becoming almost negotiable. You know, is this the truth? Is that the truth? Where do you go for the truth? I
And
think
your truth and my truth.
yes, I think yes, and I think that there is a common. We have had to have a common sense, down to earth sense of what is truth as reality. And I think we are going to be better able to resist all these things. We have never been people who flock. You couldn't have a Jim Jones situation in Jamaica. People would figure it out. Yeah, I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid. That's not for me. And I think that we're going to resist all of this confusion in the world over what is true or not much better than the first world. We're not cultists.
I agree with you, but I actually think that in the first world, there is an awakening as a result of the internet, because I think the internet is the great library of Alexandria brought back to life. So ever since, I think it's true.
Yes, it's true. It's wonderfully said.
And it's the most marvelous thing. We have immediate access to knowledge. You as a writer, and I'm sure, Drum, you as a lawyer, and I certainly as a writer, I mean, 20 and 30 years ago, you had to get yourself dressed, go to the library, check out, get your research. Nowadays, you
does this little thing.
5 minutes, you've got the answer, or an answer, because some of it is so unreliable. But I sense that there is a movement that is not governmental, and it's certainly not at media level. It is at internet level, where people think, excuse me, we've been hearing this rubbish for so long. Why is it it's the internet version of you stop believing in soon come? Yeah,
it's funny. So I have this debate with my mother quite often, but which is that one of the things I perceive, I think governments are having a frustration at people, information that they're getting from the internet, information which they may not approve of, or they may not want you to have access to, or they may not believe is the truth. And so I think there's a statal instinctual instinct to censor that. But I think a lot of those state infrastructures over the past 100 years, from World War II, World War I, World War II coming forward, in the First World and in the Caribbean, there's a kind of presumption that the states are the custodians of what is best for us. And I think my mother's generation, this is the argument I have with my mother, I think from her generation, that is an instinctual trust that you believe the people in charge have your interests at heart. Whereas I think I'm 50 odd, I think my generation and below have seen that trust and faith between the governed and the government broken so many times. And that may be in terms of war and lies, it may be in terms of medicine, it may be in terms of health, it may be in terms of a narrative that we now, our instinct is to say, no, you, the government, cannot tell us what is real and what is true. We are going to decipher through this great new Alexandrian library of the internet. We're going to process and try and filter what we think, what you're saying is true, and what part of what you're saying is not true. And we go from there. And so I think it's a big, it's a large divide going on. It's generational. It's technological, because things are changing all the time. And then, of course, you have the great divide, between the left and the right, and politically. And then the algorithm is, so when you go on the internet, what am I seeing what some algorithm knows I want to see, and you see it over and over again, which then kind of supports my beliefs to begin with on both sides.
Well, of course, Tim Berners-Lee, who is the creator of the web, he says that they need to alter the algorithms. But I actually, Drum, am 100%. That might be your girlfriend. You better answer it.
No, it's my office. Sorry.
I totally agree with you. I think this is one of the liberating things about the internet. We have not only in the last 100 years, we have been throughout the millennia being fed, whether it was by the church, you needed to believe this.
Yes,
You had evil thoughts, you
that's
were,
where it would have started. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And,
The
and,
top down line of communication. Yeah,
and
information.
I think it's wonderful. And I encourage people actively to think for themselves and to research for themselves and to disagree. And because the mark of a civilized society and a positive society and a life enhancing society is a society that allows for disagreement and distillation leading to some renewal.
I completely agree with you. And God willing, let us agree to disagree and let us argue and debate and get angry and not resort to violence.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Because that's when you've lost the argument.
Well, that's also when the world has lost the argument.
Yes. Yeah. That's so true. I was seeing your dog beside you. So I brought up one of my bears. I must tell you, Georgie, I have 95 teddy bears.
You don't.
They're most special to me. And you ask me what if I'm writing anything. After my short stories, people keep saying, but Rachel, why don't you write your memoir? Because I'm always writing memoirs about other people's lives that, that I'm in, but then it's not, the focus is not on me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let my 95 teddy bears tell my story, because they can be really honest, and they are.
But Mom, by the time you write that book, you would have 100 teddy bears, so it would be 100 stories.
But that's good. Rachel, I need to ask you before we go.
Yeah.
Because you had a troubled relationship with your father. And I, of course, had a troubled relationship with my parents. I fully get it. And but incidentally, I absolutely adored your grandmother. I thought she was just fine. She was such a wonderful person. And I have one or two of her works here. I've got
Oh, really?
lovely, one of which is in the state dining room. It's of.
You send me pictures?
Yeah.
Can you send me? Yeah, okay.
I will. And,
yeah.
But I mean, how? Because you see, I do feel reading that book, I felt that you may not have even been aware of it, but one thing you knew was that George loved you. And a girl who doesn't feel that her father loves her, I speak from experience,
Yeah.
is definitely, well, she has tripwires put in front of her, especially when she's young and attractive. So, I mean, how?
My relationship with my father was complicated, and it was a lot complicated by the fact I lost my mother at 2.5. She wasn't in my life again till I didn't meet her till I was 18, and I had no memory of her. So that you would think everything would fall on my father, but my father didn't get back to Jamaica till I was 5. So by then I'd established my grandparents as my parents and remained totally devoted to them, to this, forever. And in a way, the other complication was my father married 5 times. My mother married 5 times.
Mom, sorry
Yeah.
to cut you.
Yeah.
Something you guys were discussing earlier. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this. This is just my 2 cents as your son is perceiving you.
Yeah.
Your grandparents who raised you loved you unconditionally.
Yeah.
Right? And we discussed about the book on George. And I think my father has always loved you unconditionally.
Yes. Yes. That's a very true point.
Maybe your father you felt didn't love you unconditionally, or would you tell me what you think, or tell us what you think?
Well,
maybe.
no, I mean, he didn't love anybody unconditionally, really. It wasn't his nature to do so. Maybe he
Nothing
loved,
personal, Rachel. It was nothing personal
it
against.
was
Yeah.
nothing personal. I mean,
He
we're
loved
all,
the people of Jamaica unconditionally, and they
that
got that.
was his unconditional love. However, whatever the politics, however politically one perceives my father, there's no doubt of his intent. He was unconditional about his country and the people of Jamaica. But he was a very drastic person, and he was, anyway, that's another, the political side is another question. When I every time I would settle down in life, my father would marry again and want to cart me off to his new home with his new wife to make a new family, and then he'd have a new child, and I would get jealous of the new child, and I wouldn't like the stepmother, and then I'd go back home to my grandparents. And there was no mother figure. All these mothers were mothers of other children, and I think it all kind of confused and messed me up in the way these things do. And it's not an excuse, because I think I would always have been a very difficult person. I'm imaginative, I'm peculiar, I'm an odd person. So
I concur.
I don't think they made me peculiar, but I think all of it made me very insecure. And I loved Daddy as a brother, because I grew up as my grandparents' child. I grew up in my father's room where he grew up. I grew up with parents that favored me, I feel, over my father, because I was a grandchild and the girl they never had. So it set off a lot of tensions, and when Daddy would insist on being, like, I started calling him Michael, and it created havoc in the family. So it was complicated. So when I left in 76, it looked as though I was running away with the rest of the middle classes. I was running away from my father, but not from his politics. I was running away from his marriages and his confusion. You know, Barbara had died recently, and I had introduced him to Beverly. He was by then married to Bev. And I got on with all these stepmothers very well after they broke up with my father, but I never got on with them when they were married to him. So, you know, there's all that confusion. But in the last 6 months of Daddy's life, when I nursed him, in a very wonderful way, we laughed at a lot of all of this. We brought it all out into the open. I can't say we ironed it out, because the past is the past, and it's crumpled and it's got its problems. But we made great friends at the end when he was sick and I nursed him. And that's what my book Slipstream is about, that, you know, which I started in from that room. But yeah, but I think any of Dad's children you spoke to probably would have their own angle on why. But I don't think Daddy was really the greatest dad. I don't know, maybe the others think so. I think he was so focused. He was like a comet, and he was just going up that sky to his destiny. And I think Jamaica was all part of that, trying whatever he was trying to do for Jamaica. And I don't really think his first love was his family. Forgive me, but I don't think so. I think Jamaica was.
Well, you know, my mother knew your
Mm-hmm.
father very well when they were young. In fact,
Yeah.
he was her first boyfriend, and actually, she was very. We used to say in front of Daddy, we used to say, "So, tell us about Michael's kisses." Thinking was sweeter than wine. but I have, as an outsider looking in, I thought your father was not particularly paternal, and not particularly. I think he was connected to people, but he said something once which was very telling. He said, "I never miss people when they're not there."
That is the fact. That is a fact.
That is a very telling.
That is the truth, and that's how he was.
And but
Interesting. He lived
it's
in the now. He absolutely lived in the now.
no.
And
But
he would live in these passions. I mean, when it came to, he fell in love. I mean, it was exhausting, the rate at which he fell in love. My grandmother used to say, you know, Michael doesn't date, he just marries. You know, everything had to be absolutely, and he would be heartbroken and the world would end. Sometimes when you thought of his huge, I loved his intellect for its capacity to link the dots. He could tell a story of the world. Me and Carol would sit on his bed. I remember him telling us about Brasilia and Brazil. And he would just make it come alive and he could make sense. I would love him now to make sense of so many things going on in the world. And then there would be this foolishness when he'd fall in love. I mean, he would just fall apart. It would become ridiculous. I don't know why. And I haven't seen anybody else in the family with that.
well, but let's remember he was a second son.
Yes, and very much his mother's favorite.
But second sons are quite different from first sons.
First sons, yeah.
And his elder brother, even though he had his own issues and problems, always regarded as the brighter one. Did you know that?
Who was who? Douglas?
He was regarded as brighter and more capable than your father. Did you know that?
Well, he was regarded as, I think, academically.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your father would have been, from he was a little boy, he would have been aware of the fact that, oh, I'm really, and also ran, and he made sure that he surpassed your...
He did. He made Doug feel like they also ran. What would you say? Drum was very close to Uncle Doug. What would you say, Drum?
About who making Doug feel like he also ran?
That Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Daddy sort of overtook Doug and...
He eclipsed him totally.
Yeah, well,
terms.
I mean, there's a history that Mom knows better than me. But Doug, I think Doug, I don't know what kind of experiment they did, but poor Doug, I think, left the home too early and ended up parentless in boarding school at a very young age. Whereas Michael stayed at Drumblair and had the privilege of growing up with these fascinating, incredibly brilliant, visionary parents, whereas Doug was in school. And I think they both had incredible brains, knowing both of them. Both of them could be quite intimidating intellectually when they were ready. More Michael than Doug on a daily basis, but they could both do it. And I think Doug realized early on that the stars were aligned for Michael to be the comic and not for him. And I think I suspect he had his niches that he said, well, I am going to just make my stamp, and with due respect to my father, I'm going to, like with the running, when he tied that really a world record of his father after 20 odd years, and then he stopped running. He'd done it. And I think he had milestones to say, well, I need to prove this to my father. I need to prove this to my mother, and to prove this to myself. Other than that, I'm going to let Michael be the star, and everybody can just be sycophants to him till the end of time. And I will do my thing in my corner. I will be academic. I will have my drinks. I will be fascinated by my sports, love my woman, and I'm not going to compete with somebody who clearly the stars have aligned from we were 3 years old to be in his favor over me.
That's so well said, Drum.
Oh, thank you.
True. Yeah.
Interesting, because of course how they flipped position. What did you think of Carmen? Because I love Carmen.
I have such vivid memories of her in my youth. She much more than well, I didn't know my mother, but much more than my stepmother stood out as the unforgettable. She was amazing, but you know, I think well, that was a tragic story, and how the marriage broke up. But I think in those days Doug was much more dazzling when he was with Carmen. They made a dazzling couple. He in his quiet way, and she was amazing. It was like she would just effervesce all day, and then at about 6 o'clock, she'd just go flat and fall asleep. But that's how I remember there was a child, and she turned up with these amazing presents. Like I remember once she gave me a doll's house set of furniture. You know, I didn't have a doll's house, so I had to get a doll's house for the furniture. But she always had imaginative things. For a child, she was fascinating.
I liked her enormously.
Yes. And you know, we have our books. We're trying to get our books reprinted. The 2 children's books, three children's books. Yeah.
Well,
No,
is there anything that I have not touched upon that you need me to have touched upon? Because everybody needs to buy the book.
Oh yes, please.
One thing I forgot to mention when you asked me about my father earlier, in terms of my impression of him, one thing I think which to me was a critical ingredient was, I mean, my father was a car enthusiast and a race car driver, I think to the level of Le Mans. So he knew cars and he drove cars. And growing up, a lot of the father-son bond with my father was in his cars driving at furious rates in sports cars around Barbados. And sometimes I'd have my brother Luke or my friends, and he would, I mean, half kill us, half scare us to death for sure. And he'd race around Barbados. And of course, in the 70s, Barbados had, few cars compared to now. But it was a part of who I knew as my father was a man of speed and skill, car-wise. And I think that was one he loved. There was people he loved as friends. His 2 or 3 women he loved forever, including my mother, and he always loved his cars. So, yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, I think that your father's choice of the West Indies was very intelligible because, of course, I've lived all my life amongst the aristocracy, whether it was in Jamaica or in Britain. And the West Indian upper classes and the British upper classes have an awful lot in common. Part of which is naturalness, part of which is directness. None of the mealy-mouthed nonsense that the British middle class, and I would imagine now the emerging West Indian middle class would be about, watching their P's and Q's.
Very interesting, yeah.
And also, of course, Jamaica, when we were young, and Barbados, I'm sure, as well. All the West Indian islands were like 50 years behind England in some ways. So so really what they got, especially after the Second World War, where there was austerity in England, but there was prosperity and plenitude in the West Indies. So not only, and you had the graciousness of the West Indian way of life, which you had in England until the Second World War, which you still had in the West Indies when we were young. And I think it was to a limited extent, you still have it now in the West Indies. I mean, we have it in England a little bit, but not to the extent that we did when your mother and I were children. So I think there was a natural, actually, what they were doing was they were transplanting themselves to a warmer climate with a way of life that was very similar to what their parents had and they then aspired to. What do you think?
Well, I'm grateful for having been the beneficiary of being having a family tree transplanted to the Caribbean, because I'm a waterman and a sunny day kind of fellow. So that has been good for me, for sure. And I think in terms of the upper class West Indians now, I don't know what has changed a lot, but I know they have a lot fancier toys now.
Yeah, yeah, I
But
suppose.
you know, it's interesting you say that because my grandmother, of course, was English. Well, she grew up in England. She was half Jamaican, but she grew up in Cornwall in England. So there was this strange kind of ambivalence in the house that she was very, you know, the culture of Jamaica and building a new Jamaica, and we must find a nascent voice. And then things like my stepmother Thelma cooked with garlic, and my grandmother was appalled because in England you just didn't cook with garlic in those days. I'm sure you do now. But she had all these little kind of English traditions and all the knives and the forks and the different glasses. And yet, you know, she was so wholly for all this change. And in a way, she was anti-colonial and anti-England. You know, even her Negro roused in the harbor as a symbol against the British. You know, people don't realize, seeing this big Negro Rose figure, that it's done by an Englishwoman from Cornwall with blue eyes, and it was really funny, you know. So we had these two things in our
and
home.
she seasoned her Sunday chicken with salt and pepper only.
Only.
Oh,
And you know, the whole roast beef on Sundays and Yorkshire pudding, it was so English. So to this day, you know, I like bland vegetables because I grew up without any, you know, overboiled cabbage and bland vegetables.
your grandmother was a great lady.
She was wonderful. Thank you. I
And
think
she
so.
was a lady, and she also
Yes.
was, you know, I mean, aside from being an artist and being a fabulous personality, she was a lady. And
Yes.
and you can't, you know, being a lady is not only a matter of knowing the rules and what to follow and what to break. It's like being glamorous or being generous or there's a spiritual element to it.
Yes.
And she
And
had
she really had that.
you know, and she wasn't stiff. On the contrary,
Not
she
at
was
all.
the antithesis of stiff.
She wasn't at all. But they were a pair. They were an amusing pair together.
I didn't know your grandfather at all. I mean, my mother's family, the Smedmores, loved your grandfather.
Yeah.
And of course, my father's family loved Buster. But I mean, in those days, the British side of Jamaica veered more towards your great-grandfather, while the richer side of Jamaica veered towards Buster.
Absolutely.
And but I didn't know your grandfather at all. But
I'll tell you an amusing story about him. Just quickly. Carol used to live with me, and we would go next door and steal cigarettes because we both smoked. So one day she went over to go and steal some cigarettes from my grandmother's cupboard. And when she went in, my grandmother was there with Ball the Potter and Huey the Painter and all her artistic gang around her. And she heard somebody come in and she went, "Norman, Norman." And then she saw it was Carol. "Oh, hi, Carol." So Carol goes inside, opens my grandmother's cupboard, and all of a sudden she's startled when she looks under the clothes, sitting in the cupboard, is my grandfather hiding from my grandmother's soiree going on. And he looks at her and he goes, and she leans in the cupboard, takes out a pack of Albany cigarettes and looks at him and goes, you know, and he was always hiding from Mad, because Mad was very sociable, and he was, but he had a sense of humor, you know. He was a lovely man, a sweet man.
My brother Mickey knew him very well and used to say what a wonderful person he was. But I never ever met him. You know,
you would have loved him, and he had a twinkle, you know. He looked like he was all serious.
He was a good-looking man.
I think he's much more handsome. Everybody says Daddy was so handsome. I think NW was more handsome.
I
I
agree.
thought he
I
was.
agree. But
His
your
brother Roy, who died, was even
Was
more.
even more handsome. Yeah.
really,
Oh,
really
I'll send you a picture of him.
do
I
because
will, Roy.
your
Oh,
father was a good-looking man. He was,
yes.
you
Well,
know.
he was more, I think, well, it's hard for a daughter to judge, but he seemed to be a more sexy man, a kind of more James Bondy kind of man, whereas my grandfather was more noble looking. He had this noble Roman nose. Um,
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, they were both really good-looking.
yes, I think so.
Actually,
I think so.
you know. And you inherited, I don't know, well,
I
you
look like,
look
well,
like,
some people say I look like my father. A lot say I look like my mother. I think I look like my grandmother.
I
What
agree.
do you think, Drum?
Not your mother, not your grandmother. Yeah, you have a look of Michael sometimes.
Well,
I don't
that's good.
see Edna or Jacqueline in you.
Okay, maybe I just think they're there. Now my hair has gone gray. I see my grandmother. Remember, she was always gray.
I
You
think
just have your own beauty mother.
I,
Oh, my dear, thank you.
I think you have your grandmother's elegance,
Oh,
Yes.
physical. That I think you have. But I mean, you know,
True.
your mother was very good looking. I mean, she's still a nice looking woman, but at 70 something, none of us looks the way we did at 16.
Yes.
oh.
I mean, she was
Well,
a
you have done very well. You have done very well, Georgia, I have to say.
thank
You are
you.
stunning.
Thanks, but I definitely let me put it this way. When I was 19 and walking down a New York street and stopping traffic, nowadays this wouldn't happen, you know. I mean, the truth is that youth does have its advantages. And I don't regret actually getting older. In fact, I don't know what you think, but well, of course, you're
I
not.
prefer it.
But I find it liberating.
Yeah, and I'm happier. I'm much happier. I'm happier. You're going to be even happier when you get to our age, Drum.
I believe you.
But
And you'll
by
still
the
be
time you're in
struggling.
your 50s, I think the die's already cast. I think by the time you're in your 50s, you actually can sense what's going to come. You just
Yes.
Yes.
realize how good it's going to be. Age is very liberating as long as you don't drop something on the floor, then have to pick it up. That's the
or,
great reminder.
or put on your shoes and you don't have a shoe heel.
Oh, that's
Home from dinners, and oh dear, it's so undignified.
Listen, I'm going to love you both and leave you. Thank
Okay,
you
thank
very
you.
much.
It was lovely.
And
Thank you
again,
for having us.
everybody
Really.
needs to buy the book. Okay?
Okay.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope the more obtuse and obscure allusions did not elude you totally, that my introduction helped. And hopefully you will enjoy the book if you get it. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Take good care. Godspeed and bye bye.